to kind of give you guys where I was at and what we were doing at the time that this happened. I was wearing basically kind of three hats. I was running the Institute for Human Kinetics, where I worked with Dr. Tim Sharp, and we had spent about 20 years kind of optimizing cellular and molecular human performance. We worked with Racers Track Club as well as um, Brittany Reese, Dalia Muhammad, Kevin Sorrell, Carlin Isles, Usain Bolt, Asafa Powell. So basically, anybody that won a gold medal in track and field over a 20-year span, they were our athletes. We were responsible for the human performance of those athletes and how they prepared both in Olympic year, preparing for competition, as well as the 3.5 years in between each Olympic Games. And so we took those athletes through all four of those Olympic Games with pretty much every single person I mentioned. So we had 20 years with each of them, four Olympic Games in total, where each of them were multi gold medal or multi medal winners. None of our athletes left the Olympic Games without a gold or a silver medal, and I don't think any of them ever won bronze, maybe one. So they were pretty successful, and that was only probably 25% of the athletes that we worked with. At the time, I was also working with human performance and position coaching in the National Football League, where I worked also advising teams like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Philadelphia Eagles, and I spent 12 years with the now Los Angeles Chargers, where I'm still pretty heavily involved. And then as mentioned, I was director of performance and combatives for Navy Special Warfare, working with the Navy SEALs through Advanced Training Command (ATC), where we prepared them for combat deployment through various methods of human performance as well as combat training. And I was involved in both of those, both in the hand-to-hand combat as well as the human performance. I myself was a three-sport former athlete, two-sport Team USA athlete in the sports of hockey, as well as boxing. And then I also played football and had a scholarship at Florida State. So I had a lot of backgrounds that intersected in the areas where these athletes needed help and had the ability to understand all of this stuff and put it all together, mix that in with the nerd brain. And that's kind of what we were doing. When I met Tim Sharp, actually during that process at Institute for Human Kinetics, I needed somebody that could handle the athlete's overall general health as well as the nutrition. I was adequate with nutrition and biochemistry, but wanted to take that burden off my shoulders. Came across Tim Sharp in the research community. Him and I typically were advocating for similar things, which usually meant going against the grain of the general consensus, because when you look at literature, that tends to happen. And so we formed that relationship professionally where I could kind of lean on him to help me get these athletes ready in various different ways. He had biomedical background as well as being in academia as graduate and postgraduate professor. And so that's kind of where and what we were doing when I came across Lactigo. I put it to the test similarly to how Kevin did. Being a former, three-sport athlete, I definitely could go out there and put it to what the test needed to be in order to be scrutinized for the athletes we had. Had a similar experience to Kevin. Thought there's no way this has to have illegal drugs in it. Contacted him, hence the discussion we had post finding out about the gel and receiving it. Then we had another discussion about this definitely is illegal. I demanded the ingredients list, got it from him, saw that it was cosmetic, as he mentioned, and inquired about the science. There was some work done on an initial patent. There was some data collected with athletes, but none of it had been compiled. And the patent left a lot of room for the things that we needed to do with the gel. So then I contacted him and said, "Hey, look, let me come on board. I know how to do all of this stuff in terms of science and the patent and working with the athletes. I have access to the population where we can kind of test this stuff the appropriate way." They agreed, and we were off and running. The first year of that, I kind of went solo about that mission to some extent. Then I had to bring in Dr. Tim Sharp as I got into writing the patent and we got into the actual work with the athletes. There was way too much going on to tackle it by myself. Once he became on board, then it was on and cracking at that point because then we were really able to do the work of about 15 people because I'm doing the work of about eight, so is he. So we were really pushing through all the red tape that's in science. We were eliminating all the the time sinks that happen when you're passing it through 50 people's hands. So we were handling everything from the IRB applications all the way down to the recruitment of the athletes, design of the study, methodology, the whole 9 yards. During that process, we produced a second patent. So now we have both a medical as well as a human performance patent. It's a pretty robust in terms of we knew there was a delivery system in place in order to take this topical transdermal product to and through the skin to do the things it was doing. We added to what we thought we could potentially deliver down the road in the patent, which all made it through. So it's extremely robust in that regard. Things like insulin and testosterone, CoQ10, all the things that in science and medicine we would have an interest to less evasively and more safely be able to potentially deliver. And so we started off with, okay, we need to create a chain of evidence with science. There's a few ways that you can establish that with the topical. We set out to do that. First, we did transepidermal 3D skin study showing exactly how much carnosine magnesium we could put through the dermal layers in comparison to a placebo, and then also a vehicle with none of the proprietaries that are in our patent. We saw a 300% increase in the amount of carnosine delivered into and through the dermis comparison to the other two groups. And so that was the first proof of concept, all we needed to see. From there, we wanted to establish where could be primary endpoints for this carnosine. As you guys have kind of caught wind of, this is a great human performance tool. So we wanted to study where it would land within the muscle, did muscle biopsies. We did foresee this being a product that could be used in multiple different ways. So we also formulated a product as well as for the equine space for thoroughbred racehorses. We did biopsy studies both in
That's
thoroughbred
good stuff.
racehorses and in human beings. So that way we could get an idea of what was happening in both those places where we had products that were seeing similar results in the thoroughbred racehorses, we were seeing the same things that we were seeing in our athletes. So we collected that data. What we found in the biopsy, muscle biopsies, and for those of you that are unfamiliar, that's we're going in, we're taking a sample of the muscle before and after application of one time of Lactigo. So there was no prior use history. They hadn't been using it for a couple of weeks. And so that was one application. We measured before and after. We saw between a 50 and 100% increase after one application from baseline, both in humans and in thoroughbred racehorses. From there, we also wanted to collect performance data, what we call outcome-based data. So we could say, okay, now we know where it goes. It can make it in and through the skin, do things both in and on the skin and through it, also into the muscle, which could affect human performance. We then went to some of the world's best athletes at AC Milan, their Serie A League soccer team, which at the time was number one in the world. We did a study with 15 of their athletes. Tim Sharp and I commissioned that. And what we did was an aerobic and an anaerobic arm. For those of you unfamiliar, that means sprinting with an all-out effort versus working really hard just underneath what would be considered a sprint. So still very difficult. We put the athletes through both of those tests, found statistical significance in those results with small but mostly medium effect size, especially in the anaerobic arm, which is very good in science. It tells us that the signal we saw is strong, and especially in a group of only 15 athletes, traditionally you would need a much larger population to see an effect, meaning that it was very strong. So we saw up to a 15% improvement in those elite athletes. From there, we also decided we wanted to study some of the other things that carnosine and magnesium were known for in athletic performance, which would be potentially a reduction in cramping. We used the same population. We used elite professional athletes, soccer players from the same system and team, and we saw a 60% reduction in cramping at the beginning of training camp when it's the highest, 60% day by day in the Lactigo group in comparison to a placebo. We also saw a good effect size and a great odds ratio. For those of you that are familiar, it was almost 2.5 times. So you were going to have almost a 2.5 time more probability of cramping if you did not use the gel, which in an athlete is extremely significant. A cramping could mean a shutdown for the day, the week, or even the year. So that was kind of how we established our kind of chain of command in terms of the evidence that we created. During that process, you guys, I'll give a kind of a brief pivot before I bring in Dr. Tim Sharp. So during that time, Tim and I would get lots of feedback from Usain Bolt, from Brittany Reese, from all these, the world's greatest athletes. And the number one positive feedback we got from them was about how they felt better in training after the weight room, after competition, and after practice. They weren't as sore. They were able to train and practice at a higher level, which then led to better performances. And why you guys, I will mention at the time that Lactigo was introduced to our track and field athletes, the ones I mentioned, Brittany Reese, Dalia Muhammad, Usain Bolt, and Asafa Powell, Carlin Isles, and Marquise Goodwin. At the time it was introduced, there was still quite a few world records that had not been broken. All of those world records from the drug era were broken after we introduced Lactigo. And this is after having all of those athletes for 12 plus years in our system that Tim and I developed. So there was only one additional change in that entire 20-year span after those first three Olympic Games, and it was the addition of Lactigo. Usain Bolt broke the record. Brittany Reese broke the Olympic trials record. Carlin Isles scored the most tries in rugby at the Olympics, and Dalia Muhammad broke the record, and Marquise Goodwood had only the second ever non-drug tainted 100-meter time sub 10 seconds. The only two that have ever not tested dirty for performance enhancing drug in the top 10 100-meter times are Usain Bolt and Marquise Goodwin, and both of them were Lactigo athletes. So they were doing some amazing things, you guys, when they had the addition of this gel. It wasn't just, hey, they go out and perform better. They shattered world records, Olympic records. And so during that time, these athletes, while they were performing well, that's not what they were talking about to Tim and I. They were saying, I feel great. I'm not sore. I can get out of bed. My injuries are better. My pain's got, I got range of motion in my shoulder, etc., etc., etc. So that really piqued our interest. We wanted to study delayed onset muscle soreness. All of you guys have gone and hit legs after a long time, and you can't even sit down and go to the bathroom 2 days later. We all know about delayed onset muscle soreness. We really wanted to study it for the average person too. And so during that process, we needed to understand what is delayed onset muscle soreness, what is happening in the muscle that's creating that pain and reduces our ability to produce strength. So when we looked at that, the thing that kind of had lights glowing around it was something called glutamate. So we were like, oh, yeah, that's going to be it. Glutamate is going to be what's causing that pain sensation in those nerves in our muscles when we work out really hard and we haven't been doing much, sitting on the couch. So we were like, well, let's investigate what carnosine can do with glutamate. Well, they can't coexist in the same place. I could think of a few religious groups to mention that would be comparable, but I won't. But let's just say there was some fierce battles if these two were to see each other in a dark alley. So what that meant was that's great for us. That means that we're going to be able to potentially mitigate the things that are creating this pain. If we get rid of the pain, we're going to have better strength. That's just how it works. So that's what kind of piqued our interest in terms of our next research product. So we started designing the research study. When that happened within the first week, the kind of lights clicked in my head because I said, you know what? Delayed onset muscle soreness, the more I learn about it, sounds an awful lot like fibromyalgia. And that's really where all this kind of started to matter. Improving performance in athletes is great. And there's only basically illegal drugs, protein and creatine that actually have evidence. There's not much out there. And that is fantastic. But this was something different because now we're talking about health. Now we're talking about general wellness. And we're talking about something that doesn't have an actual treatment for it to date, fibromyalgia. And so that was really where we realized, hey, this is not just a human performance improvement gel that can be used by athletes. And that's really where we kind of had to slow down and look at what we were doing, get ourselves right with the FDA and Health Canada. And that is exactly what we did, you guys. So this product is fully regulated by both the FDA in our menthol version, and the non-menthol version is fully regulated by Health Canada, which is the same regulatory body as the FDA there. So once we had all those things in place, we started to kind of look at all this stuff that was going on in the human body. And I'm going to bring in Dr. Tin Sharp and let him kind of speak a little bit more about the biomedical side of what we're investigating now and what the research has already shown us a path about what carnosine can and would do if people were able to get it through oral delivery, which they can't. And so I will only mention this, you guys. As I kind of looked at fibromyalgia, and we found this foe that was potentially causing these problems in interstitial glutamate. The more that we started to understand that, carnosine can do really unique things for the nervous system as well as all these other systems in the body. But it is very good at creating homeostasis for the nervous system and calming down hyperexcitability and excitotoxicity and all these things. And when we really started to look at all these different conditions like cystic fibrosis, like fibromyalgia, like Parkinson's disease, like Alzheimer's, like ADHD, like autism. One of the things that's a common thread for all of those is glutamate. Hands down, it is the number one neurotransmitter for memory. It is extremely important for our bodies. However, when it is found in excess, which you see in all of those conditions, it wreaks havoc. Carnosine and glutamate cannot coexist, like I mentioned. That's an extremely powerful statement when you realize how many different places it's causing a problem and one of the main culprits for those diseases I mentioned.